We hope that this exhibit will travel from here to other Jewish museums in other cities throughout North America. It certainly deserves to. And now I want to remind you of the fact that throughout Jewish history we've had incredible problems and issues, and we have been a resilient people. One of them is that for most of Jewish history, one half of the Jewish people has been absent from positions of power. The half of the Jewish people I'm talking about is women. And one of the great revolutions that has taken place in American Jewish life and in Jewish life all over the world is that we face this issue, and sometimes it was not easy. And now one of the wonderful things about Jewish life, certainly here in North America and elsewhere, is that one half of the Jewish people is no longer invisible when it comes to power and influence. Well, one of the most important things about our speaker this evening is that indeed she represents this revolution. I'm not sure that with all her talent and intelligence 100 years ago that she would have achieved the position that she has. So we're here to celebrate all the possibilities of resiliency and change that takes place in the Jewish people. Shoshana Cardin was, for me, initially a resume, and it's very impressive. I mean, the chair of the United Israel Appeal, the vice chair of the United Jewish Appeal, the past president of the Council of Jewish Federations, on the executive of the Jewish Agency, the president, the chair of Klal, and above all, for 2 years, the leader of the North American Jewish community, the chair of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. Well, it was a resume until I had the opportunity to have breakfast with her. And I want to tell you, once you get the persona, do you understand? Once you encounter the persona, then all of a sudden, Shoshana Cardin became real to me. And I had a wonderful time spending about an hour and a half with her. And what I noticed are the things that are more important to me than what I read on the resume. She's intelligent, really. She's very sensitive. She tunes into what you're interested in, what's important to you. She's forthright. She doesn't mince words. She's good-humored because the world is a little crazy. She loves the Jewish people, and that's very, very clear. And she is an open-minded person. But above all, what I sensed about her, this leader who came, born in Tel Aviv and lived in Baltimore and then came onto the national, international Jewish scene, what I sensed in her is what you can't go to school for. She is a natural leader. She has that strength. She will not be swayed simply by the crowd. And that strength was, for me, a kind of source of my admiration for her. So in the spirit of a pluralistic Judaism, I want to say that we are honored, Shoshana Cardin, to have you here this evening to be the keynote speaker of this colloquium.
You will forgive me while I dress for the videotape. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for that overly generous, complimentary introduction. I, too, enjoyed our breakfast in Detroit. I think it was very helpful to me and very reassuring. And the reason it was both helpful and reassuring is after you sent the invitations out for this colloquium, I received phone calls from people who asked, "Why did you accept that invitation? What are you, a conservative Jew who has a daughter who is a conservative rabbi, married to a conservative rabbi, whose grandchildren, and I have 10, are all being educated or will be educated in either Solomon Schechter or Jewish community schools, who obviously believes in spirituality in her own way. What are you doing accepting that invitation? As a matter of fact, I was asked that question as I entered this room this evening. So I will give you the brief answer, and then I will give you the explanation. Any Jew, any individual who wishes to identify with the Jewish people, who is willing to assume both the privilege and the responsibility of being Jewish, who wishes to understand and learn our teachings, our heritage, our history, our commitment, and our distinctiveness in this world, should be accepted as a Jew of the community. That's why I'm here, and I am thrilled and honored to be here. If I might digress for a moment, I'm certain all of you received or picked up this very, very fine reminder of this exceptional exhibit, and it is an exceptional exhibit, and I thank you very, very much for making it possible for us to see. I'm jealous because the title of this says, Jews and Figurative Art, the First 3,000 Years. Why am I jealous? I am responsible, as the chairman of the National Committee for Jerusalem 3000, for literature that comes out celebrating Yerushalayim, its tri-millennium. But I wasn't smart enough to say the first 3,000 years. I only said 3,000 years. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident. I do believe that we can, and we have, gone back in our history to learn from it, to understand it, and to interpret it to others. For us, history is not a book. It is not a map. It is not flat. It is multidimensional. It is the very essence of our understanding. And going back and studying from our history and our liturgy and our teachings, we understand who we are today, and we can even look at some of the problems that we face today. We are not the first to face these problems. By now, you're probably aware that I'm not a demographer, and I'm not a professor, and I'm not an artist, and I'm not an author. I'm a lay leader, a passionate Jew who really believes that being Jewish is special and requires us retaining that particularist, distinctive facet of our lives to share with others, because we're not a selfish people either. Many years ago, I read some works by Mordechai Kaplan, and I was intrigued by his definition of Judaism, because one of the things that we will be discussing in the colloquium is why. Why be Jewish? Why promote Judaism? Why is the whole world concerned now about Jewish continuity? Of course, I don't understand the continuity part of it, but why are we concerned? What is the Torah now? What's the agony? And the definition that Mordechai Kaplan gave of Judaism is one that is most appropriate for this colloquium. Judaism is a civilization with its unique land, language, and literature, with its specific days of celebration, such as Sukkot, and I wish all of you Chag Sameach and enjoy the rest of Sukkot, and mourning, rites of passage, even eating habits. And this is what he said some close to 50 years ago. Those not involved must be exposed to this opportunity to choose Judaism for themselves. Remember when that was said. And so we are here to discuss how we help them choose, who they are, whom we are helping, and what role we have to play within our own lives to move this forward. As you well know, in 1990, there was a National Jewish Population Survey. It was commissioned by the Council of Jewish Federations. It was part of the International Survey of World Jewry. In the year 2000, we will have another census, as it were, of world Jews to see where we are and how far we've come, both demographically and politically, as well as socially, economically, psychologically, religiously, etc. In June 1991, after the initial study had been published and there was time for researchers to go through the data and understand those data and interpret them for us, the Associated Press carried a headline. Quote, polls show that most Jews shun religious identity, unquote, stating that being Jewish means belonging to a cultural or ethnic group rather than a religious group. Of those who were identified as Jews, 5.5 million American Jews identified themselves as Jews, even though we believe there are 8.5 million who live in Jewish households. 5.5 million identified themselves as Jews. In that number, 4.4 million identified themselves as Jewish by religion and ethnicity or culture, but 1,135,000 identified themselves as secular. We don't know how they identified secular. We don't know the definition they used, but we do know that 1,135,000 Jews said, we're not religious. On us, you shouldn't count. This is a fertile field for secular humanist Judaism. The numbers are enormous. When I speak of unaffiliated, I'm not speaking about assimilated. And let me clarify that. For me, one who is assimilated has walked away from and is not really interested in being proud of being Jewish. I am not ready to use our limited resources on that individual. But on the one who says, I am Jewish, but I really don't care to join because I don't know what it is you want me to join, or what you want from me when I do join, that person I'm interested in, because that person has already identified as a Jew. Further analysis of the data, according to Remor and Katz, showed that those Jews under 50 years of age, were less identified, less affiliated, less concerned about Israel, and less concerned about anti-Semitism. That's not unusual. Look at our society, at those under 50. We have become a highly individualistic, materialistic, if not narcissistic, society. And if you know the expression, wie azoi se kristel sich, azoi yidel sich. If that's what's happening in the general community, sooner or later it's going to happen in the Jewish community. So that's where we are. Further, there was a study done just last year, or reported last year, by Euclid's Associates, which says that American Jews in the West are even less affiliated, much less affiliated than American Jews in the center of the country or the East. They are more self-defined as secular, without established communities, more individualistic, and less respectful of authority. They are definitely not candidates for religious Judaism. Now, all of this, for me, represents a serious challenge, but a phenomenal opportunity. We are so few, and I believe we are so precious to humanity, not just to Jewish people or Klal Yisrael, but to humanity, that we have to encourage others to understand why we feel the way we do, why we act the way we do, and why this is of major importance to us now. A Jew cannot be a Jew alone. I don't know if you've heard that. That is not my terminology. That is by Elie Wiesel. He stated that recent history has shown us that whenever he, a Jew, is forsaken by his own, the Jew is lost. But when he is supported by his own, he can begin again. I have been to the former Soviet Union and the Soviet Union now about 14 times. The more I go, the more Jews we find. The more we send shlichim into communities where we thought there were 6 Jews or 10 Jews or 15 families, we end up finding 100. The more they recognize that there is someone who is willing to say, join us, we are Jewish, we can help you. We can help you identify. We can help you belong to the Jewish people, the more are identifying themselves. The numbers bear this out. In the early 1980s census, by the Soviet Union, they said there were approximately 1,125,000 Jews. As of today, 650,000 have come to Israel, 40,000 a year since '89 coming to the United States, 55,000 in Germany, many in Canada, Australia, and elsewhere. So we are close to 800,000, 900,000 Jews having left the former Soviet Union. As of today, we have 1,125,000 Jews in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, by name. And we don't know how many others. The reason they have identified is they have been asked or invited to affiliate, but unlike our country and others, nobody asks them, what do you want to be? Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, secular, Jewish this way, Jewish that way. That's not the question that's asked. The question is asked, would you like to learn Hebrew? How about coming to an ulpan? Would you like to hear some music? Would you like to read some literature, which we can translate into your language? A very different approach. Affiliation is critical. To be a Jew, one must be affiliated. Dr. Jonathan Wucher stated that affiliation is the prerequisite for the maintenance and vitality of Jewish community, not just for the Jew, but of the Jewish community. Jews who do not affiliate with one or more of associations that comprise our Jewish community, and our Jewish community consists of many associations, there is no single Jewish community, make no effective contribution to the collective life of American Jewry. Affiliation, according to Dr. Wucher, is the practical and concrete bridge between Jewish identity and community. So it is important for us to invite these people and make it comfortable enough for them to want to affiliate. Affiliations, I have learned, arise out of a combination of psychological, social, and ideological motivations. That's great language, and today, when you ask young people, it translates this way, because I speak to young people in college and in high school, and they say to me, okay, what's in it for me? How will being Jewish help me? How will it improve my life? And what does it cost? And they don't mean just money. What they mean is, will it help me get more out of my life, and what will I have to invest to get a better life? My answer to them is yes to all of the above. It'll help you get a better life. It'll help you enjoy a life. It'll help you find answers to questions of life, because there are answers. This challenge is not limited to the United States. If it were, maybe it would be easier to accept, but the fact is it's not. It's worldwide. In 1989, prior to the National Jewish Population Survey, Dr. Della Pergola wrote, and I quote, and you will be hearing from him, many diaspora communities are experiencing the same trend, many diaspora communities experiencing the same trend toward increasing remoteness from Judaism with each successive generation, which is occurring in the United States. And that's how we've identified it. Because we are Jews and we believe that there's one hand and then there's the other hand, you know that story, on the one hand, on the other. There are those who believe that assimilation now has reached its peak, that we can't be any more assimilated in this country. 2 justices, Supreme Court justices, the heads of industry, media. We've succeeded to the ultimate. I don't agree. I don't agree. I think assimilation can continue because those are not the measurements of it. For me, assimilation is walking away from Judaism, however one walks away from Judaism. Of course, I have to say, remember, 2 hands. On the other hand, I was listening to a commercial 2 days ago in the hotel room when I was in St. Louis. And I didn't see the commercial, but I heard the commercial. And I'm listening to the commercial, and it caught my attention so much so that I wrote it down. I don't know what the first few words of the commercial are, but it's a woman's voice. And she says, a whole mouthful of flavor. You know, the whole Megillah. I'm listening. This is national television. It's a major station. It's either CNN, ABC, CB, one of those. And I'm saying to myself, this is a woman saying a whole mouthful of flavor, the whole Megillah. You know what the product is? Wheaties. That night, somewhere around 11 o'clock, I was back in the same hotel room, and an actor whose name I don't remember, you'll forgive me, but he sells sausage and pork products. I have no idea who it is, but he has a Western, Jimmy, okay, right, says, ham and cheese on bagel is the best you've ever eaten if you've never had. And I'm going, maybe this individual is right. Maybe we're Judaizing the American community, and therefore we don't have to be concerned. They're both correct, by the way. And if we would listen, and I began listening a little more carefully, there's a tremendous amount of Jewishness in the general community today that we don't even hear. We have blocked it out or we have ignored it. We should pay attention. We should pay attention because some of it we can explain is basic to us. And we ignore it, but others are picking it up. See, you can teach everybody about the Megillah now because it goes with Wheaties. My own sense is unless we begin to open the door, redefine who we are, communities, multiple Jewish communities within a larger Jewish peoplehood, we will lose those who are not attracted to us now. The wisdom of Judaism, the richness of Judaism, the flexibility of Judaism is critical to the understanding of what these people may want, whoever they are. For years, we have had answers to the questions of life. And for years, through the Siddurim, through the Seder, through other methodologies, we have known which questions to ask. And if you remember your Pesach Seder, we are unhappy with the fact that there is one child who doesn't even know the questions. It's the questions that are important. Today, we have a very large American Jewish community that doesn't know the questions. The answers we have in many, many books, in teachings, in examples, in morals, but they don't even know the questions. And this is why Jewish education is so critical. There obviously is, as Rabbi Wein said, no single answer to the unaffiliated. There can't be. The unaffiliated is not a group of people. The unaffiliated is a series of individuals who can only be attracted as individuals. And if we don't stop thinking of the unaffiliated as this mass of people that is faceless, we will not succeed. We have to recognize that we have to bring it down to person to person to person. We can only enter that individual's heart and mind if we treat the individual as an individual, not as a statistic and not as an unaffiliated, but a human being who identifies as a Jew but has not yet understood how it would enrich his or her life to be affiliated. We have to provide a range of alternative ways, not without parameters. The age of emancipation, the Haskalah, which made it possible for Jews to move away from their confined shtetl and the ghettos and the limited thinking, which unfortunately did exist, did not mean that every Jew could make Shabbos for himself and still say, I am part of the community. What it meant was we could have alternate forms of Judaism with parameters, options with limitations and definitions. This is what we have to do today. Multiple options, secular humanist Judaism as a valid option, along with religious options, along with other options. Let me explain. I grew up in a household which I thought was a traditional household, and I know this. I described that at that breakfast. By traditional household, I should say, I realize now I came from a mixed marriage. And you're going to wonder what I mean by a mixed marriage. My mother, Ima, Aleha HaShalom, believed in God and prayed. I knew that she prayed at Kever Rachel to be fertile and to have children. And I knew she went to shul because she took me with her. It was an Orthodox shul in the early years. Abba went, my father, Aleha HaShalom, also went to shul. But I couldn't see what Abba was doing because there was a mechitza, and I was too little to look over the top. to see what he was doing. But he was in shul, and I knew he had a talit, and I knew he wore a kippah, and I knew he was doing what Jewish men do in shul. It wasn't until I was in a position in a conservative synagogue with no mechitza, with Abba and Ima sitting next to me, that I realized he wasn't reading the Siddur at all. He was reading Hebrew literature. He was reading Hebrew magazines. He was thinking of articles he was going to submit to Hadoar or the Yiddish Kämpfer. He knew how to pray. He was extremely educated, Jewishly as well as academically. He had memorized, because he grew up in Riga, Latvia, and his family insisted, he had memorized almost all of the Tanakh. He knew the Rabbanim. He knew how to explain what happened, and if you gave him a chance, he would give you absolutely the pasuk, the page, the verse, who said it, when it was said, and 16 interpretations that show that that's not really what was done. That was Abba. But religious? No. In the sense of believing in a deity. And when I realized that, I went back in my memory to recall my youth, to recall who came to our house as guests. And I then began to recall conversations, and I realized Abba and Ima were both labor Zionists. So that meant they were socialists from the beginning, right? Out and out socialists, no question about it. And I was raised in Habonim, youth movement, which is a socialist youth movement. But as I tried to recall the conversations, I realized brilliant man, a dentist, was an atheist. Professor of Jewish history was a communist. Professor of mathematics at Johns Hopkins University was an agnostic. I can't remember a single person who came to the house to either talk or play cards with Abba who didn't question or ignore religiosity. The reason I didn't know it is because my parents had this wonderful relationship. Shabbat was Shabbat. We did light the candles. We made the bracha. We didn't go through the whole thing, and I don't remember ever benching in my house because it wasn't important, but I didn't realize that. Shabbat was Shabbat because my father early on was a Hebrew teacher. So how could a Hebrew teacher do anything but go to shul and observe Shabbat? When he stopped being a Hebrew teacher for a period of time, Shabbat was still Shabbat because we were accustomed to it. It was Jewish, but it wasn't because it was religious. It's because it's healthy for the spirit to observe Shabbat, to regenerate, to rethink. But on Shabbat, Abba read Hebrew literature, Yiddish literature, Russian literature. It was an intellectual relaxation or recreation. Yontif, of course, we went to shul. The house was kosher. But then he had become accustomed, so had my mother. So the food had to taste Jewish. And then I realized that I had been born into a family in which the filter of my life was Judaism. We thought Jewishly, we read Jewishly, we ate Jewishly, we looked Jewishly, we read into other people Jewish components of life. It was not something we put on and took off. It was not something we walked into an institution to get. It was the very air we breathed. That's what Judaism meant. The very air we breathed, the answers to our questions, the solace in our grief came from Jewish sources, came from Jewish community. And that's what Judaism means to me. It's a way of life. It's not a creed. It is a full way of life. And I think if we can explain today, as we heard earlier, that the history of the Jews is not a history of oy vey. That's gone. It shouldn't have been, and it is gone. Even if we have tsaris, it's not oy vey. It's a history of positive, optimistic approaches to serious challenges in life, communally and individually. Judaism is a way of life that says you can succeed, and you are responsible for your own destiny. Individual responsibility, respect for the other human being, respect for laws of social justice, compassion for those who are not as fortunate as we. Women, children, men, elderly, poor, aged, infirm. That's what Judaism is. It's making this the best of all possible worlds. Tikkun olam. Not just for ourselves, but for the totality of humanity. Is there anyone who would be ashamed of that type of a life credo or motto? Is there anyone who would not be proud to be part of this people who has shaped, and we have shaped, humanity that is known as Western civilization? To whom we gave a series of ethics, codes, and morals to live by, so that we wouldn't live like animals and we wouldn't sacrifice human beings? So we would consider each individual precious, not necessarily because created by God, but because we are alive on this earth. If we can invite people to the positive, to the beautiful, to the richness of our heritage, I think we would have less unaffiliated. And just in case we thought that we are the first to deal with unaffiliated, let me go back to Achad Ha'am, very famous historic philosopher who believed that we should be a cultural people. He understood what that meant. He recognized that there has to be a set of beliefs not limited to religion, that Judaism was more than a religion. If we were going to succeed in this world, the 20th century, we had to build a culture which included science and art and literature and music, a culture which included understanding the teachings and ethics of Judaism, but not necessarily tying them to a deity, but also a culture that required and invited affiliation. From the very beginning of our teachings, we've had an expression, I believe it's in Pirkei Avot now, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the community. One, the community will lose, but two, you, the individual, will lose if you separate yourself from the community. Our Judaism requires our particularism and our distinctiveness, even though we have a universalist outlook. The danger among the unaffiliated is that they will absolutely become invisible and disappear. They will say we're Jewish, but they will not have any of the distinctiveness that makes us Jewish. And they can't have it if we don't teach them. So we have to be able to invite them to come in and learn at the level at which they are and the pace at which they wish to learn. Because I believe that we are capable of enhancing that if we but get an opportunity. We have another dilemma. Our society, at this point, is a vertically labeled society. We have all kinds of labels. You are either Reform or conservative, Orthodox or Reconstructionist or secular, and they don't really mean anything anymore. Because in Orthodox you will find 10 different variations and definitions of Orthodox. In my city in Baltimore, we have about 12 Orthodox synagogues. Some of them have big parking lots, some of them have little parking lots. They're Orthodox. Conservative. We have 4 conservative synagogues. One has an organ. The other has a female associate rabbi. Mine has neither. But we're all conservative. So labels are no longer have meaning and value. It is the individual and how that individual can identify with the community that is critical. And what binds us together is that there is some set of ritual. There has to be, in any community, a set of ritual, certain behaviors that are easily identified. One of the most beautiful things that I enjoy as I travel around the world, and I've gone to parts of the world where the synagogues were simply empty shells left over because of the either communism or events in the world that closed down the synagogue as a synagogue but kept the building. What fascinated me is if I went in and said a few words in Yiddish or a few words in Hebrew that had a ring to them, I was already a member of that community. Shalom Aleichem. And you're joined. Come in. You're part of it. I was at a shul in Moscow in 1989, And of course, the great shul there, the great synagogue, has the mechitza, which it does because that's the way it was developed. And I was fascinated to see that there were 7 other shuls going on at the same time. I was upstairs with the women behind this mechitza. There couldn't have been more than 25 women in this huge shul. And in each corner was a little shtibel with 10, 12, 15 men. Each was davening with its own Torah, at its own speed, finishing at its own pace in this one shul while there was a service going on. Don't think there wasn't a service going on. And I was invited by one of the women, because my Yiddish is enough to get by, I was invited by one of the women to join them for Kiddush. 1989 and 1990 were very difficult years in the Soviet Union. It was still the Soviet Union. Food was short. People had very little to keep themselves together. It was obvious the country was going under as a Soviet Union. There was tremendous instability and fear. And I thought, Kiddush, I mean, these are all I'm mention, if you know what that means. Where are they going to get the wherewithal to make Kiddush? And the woman invited me downstairs to that shtibel in that corner. And I went down, and it was a table. They took off the Torah, they covered it up, folded it, and put it away. And suddenly, there were about 25 to 30 people. Out of one coat came a tablecloth. Out of another coat came 3 bottles of vodka. Out of another coat came 2 dishes of gefilte fish. Another had some bread. Somebody else had the glasses, the small shot glasses. And I watched. And inside of 5 minutes, this community, because that's what they were, had put together a magnificent Kiddush of which anyone would be proud. It had everything you needed. And even though some of them did not speak Yiddish, others did, and they waited for me to join them in making the bracha. And I was so taken aback. Of course, they wanted me to make the bracha over vodka, and I had never drunk vodka. Minor problem. I could not offend them. So first I said, no, I don't drink, but it didn't help. After all, it's Shabbat, it's after services, and it's a tradition. Tradition. That's what I want to tell you. Tradition is very important. These people had not been Jewish for 70 years. They had not been permitted to pray. They had not been permitted to identify. But they remembered what it was, and tradition was critical. And so I drank my first glass of vodka. I made the Kiddush and then the motzi, and we were family. Tradition is what did it. A community must have traditions, however you define them, however you develop them. They are your traditions. That is the way you will be recognized. That is the way we will be recognized. So whether we call it secular humanist Judaism or anything else, there must be ritual and tradition. That is critical to a community, very critical to a community. And I urge you to define them, and I'm certain that Rabbi Wein is defining them. The question for us is, can we be an open enough and accepting community to welcome all those who choose to be affiliated but don't understand where to go to be affiliated? I must confess that what I've seen in our American Jewish community is that if one goes to a federation, there's a membership fee. If one goes to a synagogue, there's a membership fee. If one goes to a JCC, there's a membership fee. And one doesn't know where to go to say, I'd like to start, but I really don't want to start with any of these because I'm not sure what my options are. How do we develop that entity that says, welcome, whoever you are who identifies Jewishly, and we will tell you what is available, whether it is religious affiliation, social affiliation, secular affiliation. Can we learn to be so giving and to give up turf and not worry about how many we have sitting in how many seats to say, you are Jewish, we welcome you, we love you. These are your options. Just be Jewish as part of a community. I don't know. Maybe I'm dreaming, and maybe someone will call that Mashiach Zeiten. I don't think so. I think if we recognize that we're talking about the future of Am Yisrael, not just the future of Detroit or St. Louis or Baltimore or even Jerusalem, then we will recognize that we must do away with the labels and make it possible for Jews to be Jews, and then select where they want to go and how they can best live out their Judaism. Let me tell you why I believe that we have to have community. We are basically a tribal people. A tribal people. And as a tribal people, we can only identify with a community that can give us the warmth and the comfort that an individual needs. We are not a warm, comfortable community most of the time. We are suffering from the same illness that pervades our general society. High-tech, low-touch. I would like, if I had my wishes, my dreams, I would like to convert the Jewish community to high-touch and low-tech when it comes to personal relationships. All the email you want, internet, online, that's wonderful. That doesn't answer a cry. It doesn't assuage a pain. It doesn't say, what do I do? It's without soul. It's without warmth. It's without humanity. And I believe we have the responsibility as Jews, as we have done through the centuries, we have the responsibility to show society that we must return to that sense of compassion and caring, and that there is an answer, and a hand, a home, a warm place to go when we are Aftzaris. And those of us who live long enough recognize that Aftzaris is a way of life. None of us escape it. None of us escape it. Am I thinking Mashiach Zeiten? No. Let me tell you why. Not because of what's happening in this country. In August of this year, an Israel correspondent, Larry Derfner, wrote an article, and I quote, "The Orthodox monopoly on Jewish education in Israeli public schools has been broken." Were you aware of it? Beginning September 1st, 1995, the start of the school year, conservative, reform, humanistic, and other non-Orthodox movements will for the first time bring their view of Jewish religion and history into the public school classrooms. Did you think you would live to see the day? It has arrived. However, and there's always a however, there has been an appeal from that decision of the Minister of Education. There was a three-year study which led to this. Professor Aliza Shenhar studied the educational system in Israel and found out that Israeli children were so secular they didn't know what it was to be Jewish at all. They knew what it was to be Israeli, but they didn't know what it was to be Jewish. And this is a danger for Klal Yisrael. And so her report, which was given to the Minister of Education, who is not an Orthodox Jew, found that the Orthodox, and I'm quoting, found that the Orthodox approach to the teaching of Judaism and Jewish history is not relevant to the world of secular students and generates hatred on their part against the study of Judaism, unquote. And therefore, the curriculum there has to include all. The Orthodox community has suggested that it will fight this, and indeed has gone to attempt to stop this change. I don't believe they will succeed. I believe there are enough Jews in Israel who understand what pluralism means, and if you want to be pluralistic in the totality of the society, you must be pluralistic in the religious component. And just in case you didn't know, the kibbutz movement and the Association for Humanistic Judaism will be developing Jewish educational material for use in Israeli schools. Can we do the same here? And if we can, how can we? What can we do to enable people to understand that Jews come in all different ideologies? That there is a common core, however, and if people will accept that core, as I mentioned at the beginning, that Jewish identity, that sense of commitment, that sense of community, that sense of knowledge and learning, that Jew belongs in our community. For all too long, and I will say something here that I have said publicly elsewhere, for all too long we've defined Jews in the organized American Jewish community two ways. Federation defines a Jew as a donor. This is not the first time I've said it, so I know nobody will be offended. Synagogues define Jews as a member. If you don't fall into the donor member, you don't belong, right? We have to change that. We have to change that. We will not succeed if we divide our people that way. I think that we have the intelligence, the stamina, and the ability to redefine what it means to be a member of a Jewish community, whichever Jewish community that is. And that we must recognize that we who espouse pluralism, and have done so since the beginning of our peoplehood, cannot turn our backs on pluralism in our beliefs as Jews, religious or non-religious. To succeed, we will have to open our doors and invite people to sit at tables where they have never sat before. Federations will have to invite people who don't belong to either of those two categories to sit in the room and understand what it means to move a community forward. Synagogues will have to respect the beliefs of those who don't follow their own tenets, and those who are good Jews, though they do not believe in a deity. They have to respect them. They don't have to accept them or offer them membership, because that's impossible. But to respect their individual choice as contributing members, intellectually, emotionally, and psychologically to the benefit of the Jewish people, is the least we can request of our community. That means you and I have to be open as well, and not fight against those who do believe in God, whether they be any one of the whole spectrum of religious believers. This is 1995. The 21st century is around the corner. Whatever we begin to do now will give us the foundation, if we do it well and with sincerity and with Ahavat Yisrael, will give us the opportunity to build a foundation that will be rich in Jewish traditional teachings, rich in social justice and ethics, rich in compassion for human beings wherever they are, Bosnia, Rwanda, Cambodia, Israel, former Soviet Union, here in the United States, and will enable us to be that which we have been as a Jewish people. Teachers to the world that human dignity and individual responsibility can bring us to a level of life never before recognized. We